Nobody prepares you for the moment you see a bruise on your own child and realize the world has just shifted on its axis. My son-in-law looked at me with a smirk that screamed he was untouchable. He thought I was just a 57-year-old widow fading into the wallpaper. He was wrong. That smirk was the last mistake he would ever make, because a mother with nothing left to lose is not someone you want to provoke. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 57 years old, and for the better part of 3 decades, I existed behind a frosted glass partition at the Department of Judicial Records. It was not a glamorous job. People came to me on the worst days of their lives or the most boring ones. I filed death certificates and marriage licenses and small claims paperwork until the edges of my fingers were permanently dry from the dust of archives. Since Richard passed 10 years ago, my world has shrunk to the size of my small row house near the harbour, and the steady rhythm of a life that demands very little from me. I liked it that way. I liked the predictability of a Sunday roast, for one, and the way the dust motes danced in the afternoon light of my living room. I thought I had paid my dues to the chaos of the universe. Laura was the only bright spot in that grey existence. My daughter. She was the one thing Richard and I got completely right. We used to talk every day at 6 in the evening. It was a ritual as sacred to me as morning coffee. But over the last 6 months, the calls had become sporadic. They were short and breathless and filled with hollow excuses that did not sound like my articulate and confident girl. "I'm just so busy with the new project, Mom," she would say. Or "Marcus and I are heading out. Can I call you later?" Later never came. I told myself it was normal. Children grow up and they grow away. It is the natural order of things to be left behind. But a mother knows the difference between a child who is busy living her life and a child who is hiding from it. It was a Tuesday in late September when the facade finally cracked. The weather was unseasonably warm. The weatherman had promised 75 degrees, and the humidity off the bay was thick enough to chew on. I was sitting on my porch, fanning myself with an old newspaper, when Laura's sedan pulled into the driveway. She did not park straight. The tire was up on the curb. That was the first thing that made my stomach turn over. Laura was meticulous. She never coloured outside the lines. She got out of the car, and I froze. She was wearing a thick cotton sweater with a high neck and long sleeves, in 75-degree heat. She walked up the path with her head down and her shoulders hunched forward like she was bracing for a blow. "Laura," I called out. She flinched. It was small, but I saw it. She looked up and forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. Her face was pale and drawn. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her voice sounded thin. I was just in the neighborhood." I stood up, and the newspaper slid from my lap to the floor. "Honey, you must be roasting in that sweater. Come inside and let me get you some iced tea." "No," she said too quickly. Then she took a breath and lowered her voice. "I can't stay long. I just wanted to say hi." I looked at her. Really looked at her. She was avoiding my gaze. She kept pulling at the cuffs of her sleeves, tugging them down over her wrists until only her fingertips were visible. My heart began to hammer against my ribs with a slow, heavy dread. I had spent 30 years looking at paperwork that detailed the wreckage of human lives. I knew what fear looked like on paper. Now I was looking at it in the flesh. "Laura," I said softly. "Is everything all right?" She looked at the ground. "Everything is fine, Mom." "Really? I'm just tired." I wanted to reach out and grab her arm. I wanted to pull up that heavy sleeve and see what lay beneath. But I stayed where I was. I let the silence stretch between us like a rubber band about to snap. The seagulls were crying out over the harbour, and a car honked somewhere in the distance, but all I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears. The air between us was charged with static. It was the heavy, suffocating pressure that comes before a storm breaks. I watched my daughter standing there sweating in the heat, terrified of her own mother, and I felt something cold settle in the pit of my stomach. It was a realization I did not want to name. It was a door opening onto a dark room that I had prayed I would never have to enter. She left 10 minutes later. She refused the tea. She refused to sit down. As I watched her car retreat down the street, I asked myself the question that would haunt me for the rest of my nights. How long can you look at a locked door and pretend you do not know what is screaming on the other side? Marcus Hale was the kind of man other mothers envied. He was a senior technical lead for a massive private conglomerate that had offices in a glass tower downtown. He made 6 figures and wore suits that were tailored to fit his broad shoulders perfectly. When Laura first introduced him to me over dinner 3 years ago, I was charmed. He had a firm handshake, and he looked you in the eye when he spoke. He pulled out chairs and poured water and asked polite questions about my time at the Department of Judicial Records. He seemed solid. He seemed like safety. I remember their wedding day clearly. It was a simple affair in a rented garden near the coastline. Laura looked radiant in ivory lace, and Marcus looked like the protector I had always prayed she would find. I cried during the vows. I looked at my daughter's beaming face and told myself that I could finally stop holding my breath. I thought my job was done. I thought I had delivered her safely to a shore where she would be cherished. The change did not happen overnight. It was a slow erosion, like water wearing down a stone. In the beginning, we had Sunday dinners at their apartment. The mood was light and the wine flowed freely. But gradually, the air in that immaculate condo began to change. The silence grew heavier. It was not the comfortable silence of intimacy, but the tense silence of a library where everyone is afraid to make a sound. I started noticing the way Marcus managed the conversation. It was subtle at first. Laura would start to tell a story about her day at the graphic design firm, and Marcus would place a hand over hers. "Honey," he would say with a tight smile. "Nobody wants to hear about the printer jam again. Tell Evelyn about the promotion I'm up for." Laura would stop mid-sentence. Her mouth would close, and she would look down at her plate. "Right. Sorry. I forgot." He made decisions for her that seemed helpful on the surface. He ordered her food at restaurants because he claimed to know what she liked better than she did. He chose her wine. He even chose the colour of the new curtains in their living room because he said her taste was a little too chaotic for a modern aesthetic. I sat there, and I watched, and I said nothing. I told myself that every marriage has its own rhythm. I told myself that perhaps Laura liked having someone take charge. I told myself that I was being critical because I had been alone for 10 years and had forgotten what the compromise of cohabitation looked like. Relationships take adjustment. I whispered to my reflection in the bathroom mirror during one of those dinners, "Don't be the interfering mother-in-law." But the physical changes in Laura were harder to explain away. My daughter, who used to love bright floral patterns and sundresses, began to dress in neutrals, greys and beiges and blacks. Her necklines crept up and her hemlines went down. She stopped wearing makeup. When I asked her about it, she just shrugged. "Marcus prefers a more natural look," she said softly. "He says the bright colours are a bit childish." She laughed less. That was the hardest thing to witness. Laura had a laugh that used to fill a room, but now she offered only thin, polite smiles that vanished as quickly as they appeared. She avoided eye contact, not just with me, but with everyone. If Marcus moved his hand too quickly across the table, she would flinch almost imperceptibly. There were no shouting matches. I never saw him raise a hand. I never heard him raise his voice. It was a quiet, antiseptic control. He was pruning her like a bonsai tree, cutting away the parts of her personality that he deemed unnecessary until she fit perfectly into the small box he had built for her. I drove home from those dinners with a knot in my chest. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was torn between two terrifying possibilities. Either I was a paranoid old woman projecting my own anxieties onto a perfectly normal couple, or I was witnessing the slow suffocation of my only child. I wanted to believe I was wrong. I wanted to believe that the coldness I felt was just the draft from the air conditioning. But deep down in the place where I kept the memories of all those tragic files I had sorted for 30 years, a voice was whispering that something was rotting beneath the surface. It was a Thursday evening when I finally manufactured an excuse that Marcus could not reasonably refuse. I told Laura I needed help moving a heavy box of winter coats from the attic. It was a lie. There was no box. I just needed to see my daughter without his shadow looming over her shoulder for 1 hour. She arrived at 5:30. She looked exhausted. We were in the kitchen, and I was pouring us tea. The room was warm and smelled of lemon and cinnamon, but Laura kept her coat on. She sat at the edge of the chair like a guest who was ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. "It is warm in here, honey," I said gently. "Why don't you take off your jacket?" She shook her head. "I'm fine, Mum. I'm actually a little cold." I turned to the counter to slice a lemon. That was when it happened. It was such a small thing. A reflex. I knocked the sugar bowl with my elbow and it tipped over the edge. Laura lunged forward to catch it before it hit the linoleum. Her arm shot out, and as she reached the sleeve of her coat, rode up. Time stopped. The world narrowed down to a single patch of skin on the inside of her forearm. It was not a small mark. It was a deep, violent purple blooming into a sickly yellow at the edges. It was the shape of fingers. 4 distinct pressure points, where a hand had clamped down hard enough to crush the capillaries beneath the skin. I stared at it. My breath caught in my throat like a jagged stone. The sugar bowl shattered on the floor, but I did not hear the crash. All I could hear was the sudden deafening roar of my own heart. Laura saw my eyes. She gasped and yanked her arm back, burying it deep inside her sleeve. She stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Laura," I whispered. My voice trembled. "What is that?" She backed away from me. Her eyes were wide and frantic, darting around the kitchen as if looking for an escape route. "It's nothing," she cried out. Her voice was too high, too shrill. I bumped into the doorframe. "You know how clumsy I am. That is not a bump," I said. I took a step toward her. "That is a handprint, Laura. Who did that to you?" "No, you're wrong." She was shaking now. I fell. I slipped in the bathroom and grabbed the towel rack and, "Please, Mum, stop." I stopped. I saw the terror in her face. It was not the fear of a child caught in a lie. It was the primal fear of a hunted animal. If I pushed her now, she would run. If I screamed, she would shut down. I had seen this look 1,000 times on the faces of women sitting on the other side of the glass partition at my office. I knew the script. I forced my hands to uncurl from the fists they had formed. I forced my face into a mask of calm I did not feel. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay. Let's clean up this sugar." We knelt on the floor together, sweeping up the white granules and the shards of porcelain. The silence between us was heavy enough to crush the walls of the house. We did not speak. The air was thick with the lie she had told and the truth I had seen. I watched her hands as she swept. They were trembling. I did not ask again. I did not demand answers. But I catalogued every inch of that bruise in my mind. I memorized the color and the size and the angle. I memorized the way she flinched when I moved the broom too close to her. When she left 20 minutes later, she hugged me stiffly. "I love you, Mom," she whispered. "I love you too," I said. I watched her drive away, and then I went back into the kitchen. I stood where she had stood. I looked at the spot on the floor where the sugar had spilled. The doubt was gone. The internal debate was over. That mark on her arm was not an accident. It was a message. It was a signature. Marcus Hale had put his hands on my daughter. He thought that because she was quiet and I was old, that no one would notice. He had made a grave miscalculation. I was not just a mother anymore. I was a witness. And as I locked the front door that night, I felt a cold steel resolve settle over my heart. I was done wondering. Now I was preparing for war. I drove to their building at 2 p.m. on a Friday. I knew Laura was at her office across town, and I knew Marcus worked remotely on Fridays. It was a calculated intrusion. I wanted to catch him in his own territory, without the buffer of my daughter's nervous energy between us. The doorman let me up after a hesitant phone call to the penthouse. When the elevator doors slid open, I walked down the hallway that smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive cologne. I rang the bell. Marcus opened the door. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and dark jeans, and he looked like he had just stepped out of a catalogue for luxury living. He did not smile. He did not step back to invite me in immediately. He just stood there, blocking the entrance with his body. "Evelyn," he said. His voice was smooth and flat. "This is a surprise. Laura is not here, I know," I said. I tightened my grip on my handbag. "I came to see you, Marcus." He raised an eyebrow but stepped aside. "Well, come in then. I have a conference call in 20 minutes, so make it quick." I stepped into the apartment. It had been 6 months since I had really looked at this place. It was spacious and filled with light from the floor-to-ceiling windows, but it felt completely dead. There were no photos of Laura. There were no throw blankets she liked, or the messy stack of books she always kept by her bedside. The furniture was sharp and angular and grey. It looked like a waiting room for a high-end dental clinic. It did not look like a home where my daughter lived. It looked like a cage that had been scrubbed clean. Marcus walked to the kitchen island and leaned against it, crossing his arms over his chest. He did not offer me water. He did not offer me a seat. "So," he said, "to what do I owe the pleasure? Did you need money, or perhaps help with your computer again?" He said it with a patronizing lilt, as if I were a confused child. "I do not need money," I said. "I need to know why my daughter has a bruise the shape of a hand on her arm." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus did not flinch. He did not look surprised. He just looked at me with a mild expression of amusement. "A bruise," he repeated. He let out a short, breathy laugh. "Evelyn, are you serious? I saw it yesterday," I said. My voice remained steady, though my knees were shaking. She tried to hide it. She told me she fell. But people do not fall and leave fingerprints on their own skin, Marcus. He shook his head slowly, looking down at the floor before bringing his gaze back to mine. The amusement in his eyes had hardened into something colder. "Laura is clumsy?" he said. "She is always bumping into things. You know how she is. She gets frantic. She rushes. I have to catch her sometimes to keep her from hurting herself. That mark was not from catching someone, I said. That was from holding someone down. Marcus pushed himself off the counter and took 2 steps toward me. He was tall, much taller than me. He loomed over me, and for the first time I saw the mask slip. Beneath the polite executive exterior, there was a flash of raw, ugly arrogance. "You have a vivid imagination, Evelyn," he said softly. "But then again, I suppose that happens at your age. The mind starts to wander. You get lonely. You start inventing dramas to make your life feel significant again. I know what I saw." I said. "Do you—" He smirked. It was a slight twisting of his lips that showed 0 respect and 0 fear. "Because from where I stand, you look like a tired old woman who is trying to interfere in a marriage she does not understand. Laura is happy. I take care of her. I provide for her. If she has a few bumps and bruises, it is because she is fragile. She needs guidance. She needs structure." He leaned in closer. I could smell his coffee breath. "Don't embarrass yourself by spreading these stories," he whispered. "Nobody listens to hysterical older women, Evelyn. They just pity them." He pulled back and checked his watch. "My call is starting. You should go. And maybe call before you come next time. It is only polite." I looked at him. I looked at the smug set of his jaw and the cold, dead look in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought he had intimidated me into silence with his height and his salary and his youth. I turned and walked to the door. I did not say another word. But as I walked out into the hallway, I knew that the polite fiction of our relationship was over. He had shown me his face. He had looked at me and seen a victim. He had no idea that he was looking at the architect of his destruction. The unraveling of the truth did not happen with a shout, but with a whimper over a cup of lukewarm coffee. I met Laura during her lunch break at a diner 3 blocks from her office. I had to beg her to come. She checked her phone 4 times in the first 10 minutes. "He likes to know where I am," she said. Her voice was small and apologetic. "It makes him feel safe. You know how much he worries about safety." I watched her stir 3 packets of sugar into her drink. Laura used to drink her coffee black. "Does he worry about safety, Laura?" I asked carefully. "Or does he worry about control?" She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "No, it isn't like that. You don't understand, Mom. Marcus has high standards. He just wants us to be the best version of ourselves. And I keep messing up. I forget to log the grocery receipts. I forget to text him when I switch from the subway to the bus." She touched her temple nervously. "I am just so scattered lately," she whispered. "I make him angry. I provoke him. If I could just be more organized, he wouldn't get so frustrated." I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. It was a sickness born of recognition. For 30 years, I had sat behind a desk and processed the paperwork of broken homes. I had seen thousands of restraining orders and affidavits. I knew the language of the victim. I knew that "I provoked him" was the first verse in the anthem of the abused. They take the blame because it gives them the illusion of control. If it is their fault, then they can fix it. If they can fix it, then they are safe. But I knew the truth. You cannot fix a man who breaks you for sport. I went home that afternoon, and I went into the basement. I dug through an old box until I found a black, leather-bound notebook that Richard had never used. I sat at my kitchen table, and I opened it to the first blank page. I picked up a pen. My hand was steady. October 3rd, I wrote, "Bruise on left forearm, approximately 3 inches long, finger marks. October 7th. I continued. Laura flinches when a hand is raised. She claims she must account for every dollar she spends. She is tracking her location via GPS at his request. I wrote down everything. I wrote down the dates of the cancelled dinners. I wrote down the times she called me whispering because he was in the next room. I wrote down the way her clothes had changed and the way the light had gone out of her eyes. I treated my own daughter's life like a case file because I knew that in the end, feelings would not save her. Evidence would. As I wrote, a chilling realization settled over me like a shroud. Marcus was too good at this. His methods were too refined. He knew exactly where to hit so the clothes would cover the marks. He knew exactly what words to use to make her feel like the villain in her own story. He knew how to isolate her from her friends and family without looking like a monster to the outside world. This was not the clumsy aggression of a first-time offender. This was a practiced routine. It was a script he had memorized and perfected. I looked at the notebook, filled with my neat, cramped handwriting. I closed it and hid it inside the lining of my old sewing basket. I sat in the gathering dark of my living room, and I knew with absolute certainty that Laura was not the first woman Marcus Hale had destroyed. Somewhere out there in the vast, nameless geography of his past, there was another woman who had learned to stop smiling, and I was going to find her. He arrived on my doorstep at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. He did not knock. He rang the doorbell 4 times in rapid succession, a jarring rhythm that set my teeth on edge. When I opened the door, Marcus pushed past me into the hallway without waiting for an invitation. The veneer of the polite son-in-law was gone. In its place was a man who felt inconvenienced by a gnat. He stood in the center of my living room and looked around with a sneer of distaste. He looked at the worn velvet armchair and the porcelain figurines on the mantelpiece as if they were evidence of a personal failure on my part. "We need to talk, Evelyn," he said. His voice was low and dangerous. "I am listening," I said. I did not offer him coffee. I stood by the door, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. "Laura tells me you are asking questions," he said. He turned to face me, hooking his thumbs into the pockets of his designer jeans. "She tells me you are putting ideas into her head. Paranoia, hysteria." "I only asked about the bruise, Marcus," I replied calmly. He laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "The bruise? You are obsessed. Do you know who I am, Evelyn? Do you know what I do? I manage teams of 50 people. I handle budgets worth millions of dollars. I am a pillar of this community." He took a step toward me. He was trying to use his physical size to intimidate me just as he did with Laura. He wanted me to shrink back. He wanted me to cower. "And who are you?" He continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "You are a retired filing clerk. You spent 30 years pushing paper in a basement for minimum wage. You are a nobody. You have no power. You have no connections. You are just a lonely old widow who watches too much television." I said nothing. I kept my face perfectly still. My silence seemed to infuriate him more than any scream could have. "You think you can threaten me?" He spat. "I have lawyers on retainer who cost more per hour than you made in a year. If you try to slander my name, if you try to turn my wife against me, I will bury you in so much litigation. You will lose this pathetic little house before you can blink." He leaned down until his face was inches from mine. I could see the dilated pupils of his eyes. I could smell the expensive musk of his aftershave masking the sour scent of his aggression. "What can you do, old woman?" he whispered. "Really, what can you do?" It was a rhetorical question in his mind. He believed the answer was nothing. He believed his status and his gender and his bank account built a fortress around him that I could not breach. But in his arrogance, he made a mistake. He got careless. You are all the same. He sneered, straightening up and brushing imaginary dust off his jacket. You interfering mothers, always thinking you know what is best. You are just like the last one, loud and ignorant and ultimately irrelevant. My heart skipped a beat, but my face remained stone. The last one, he had slipped. In his desire to belittle me, he had admitted that this was a pattern. He had admitted that there was a predecessor. He had confirmed exactly what I suspected. Marcus expected me to cry. He expected me to yell. Instead, I walked over to the coffee table. There was a small lace doily under a vase of dried flowers that was slightly askew. I reached out and very slowly, very deliberately straightened it. I smoothed the edges until it was perfectly aligned with the wood grain. Then I looked up at him. "Are you done, Marcus?" I asked. My voice was level, devoid of any fear. He blinked. The wind went out of his sails. He looked at me with a sudden flicker of confusion. He could not understand why his performance had not yielded the desired result. He could not understand why the mouse was not trembling before the cat. You are crazy," he muttered. "Stay away from us, Evelyn. I am warning you." He turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the window panes. I listened to the roar of his engine as he sped away. He drove off, thinking he had won. He thought he had crushed me under the weight of his superiority. He was wrong. He had not crushed me. He had just given me the loose thread I needed to unravel his entire life. He thought my silence was submission. He did not know that it was the silence of a hunter who has just caught the scent of blood. Marcus made the fatal error of assuming that 30 years in administrative justice meant I was simply a woman who stamped papers. He did not understand that I was the keeper of secrets. In a city built on favors and buried skeletons, the person who manages the files is often the person who holds the keys to the kingdom. I had spent 3 decades being invisible, but I had been paying attention. I knew which judges took bribes and which police officers could be trusted to look the other way. I had never cashed in the favors owed to me. I had saved them for a rainy day. It was pouring now. I sat at my kitchen table with a burner phone I had purchased with cash at a convenience store 3 towns over. I did not use my landline. I did not use my cell phone. I dialed a number I had memorized 15 years ago. Records. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Hello, Frank," I said. "It is Evelyn Carter." There was a pause on the line. "Evelyn. I thought you retired." "I did," I said. "But I need one last look at the archives, not the digital ones. I need the physical storage in Chicago, the files from 7 years ago. That is a lot of dust to disturb Evelyn." He said, "I need to know about a Marcus Hale." I said, "He would have been 28. Check for domestic disturbances. Check for restraining orders that were filed and then withdrawn within 48 hours. Give me an hour," Frank said. I hung up. I did not pace. I sat still and drank my tea. I was not a frantic mother anymore. I was a strategist moving pieces on a board. When the phone rang 40 minutes later, I answered immediately. "You were right," Frank said. "His name is all over the blotter in the 4th precinct. There was a girl, Elena Russo. She filed a report for assault. Broken ribs. A shattered eye socket." My hand tightened around the phone. "And charges dropped 2 days later," Frank recited. "Civil settlement. The file is sealed, but I see a note here about a payment. $50,000. "Thank you, Frank," I said. Send the copies to the usual P.O. box. I destroyed the SIM card and flushed it down the toilet. I had what I needed. Marcus was not a prodigy of success. He was a predator who used his checkbook to erase his violence. He had hurt this woman, Eleanor, and he had paid for her silence. He thought he could do the same with Laura. He thought that because we were quiet people, we were weak people. I laid out the timeline on my kitchen table. I had the police report number from Chicago. I had the date of his transfer to our city. I had the pattern of escalation that matched exactly what was happening to my daughter. It was not just a domestic dispute. It was a criminal modus operandi. I called Laura late that night. She answered on the first ring, and her voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, he is in the shower, but I don't know if I can do this much longer." "Listen to me, Laura," I said. My voice was steel. "Do not provoke him. Do not fight back. Just survive. I need you to wait 2 more days. Can you do that? I think so," she stammered. "But what are you doing? You can't fight him." "Mom, he's too powerful." "He is not powerful," I said. "He is just loud. Hold on, honey. Just hold on." I hung up before she could ask more. She could not know the full extent of the trap I was setting. If she knew, she might hesitate. She might flinch. Marcus needed to believe he was still in control, right up until the moment the floor dropped out from under him. I looked out the window at the dark street. The wind was picking up, rattling the old oak tree in the front yard. The air felt heavy and charged with electricity. It was the feeling of the atmosphere compressing right before a tornado touches down. Marcus Hale was sleeping soundly in his penthouse, believing he was the king of the world. He had no idea that the storm was already at his door. I stood in the center of their living room, while Marcus poured himself a glass of amber liquid from the crystal decanter. He looked at me with a mixture of boredom and pity. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, framing him like a master of the universe. "I told you to stay away, Evelyn," Marcus said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "But you just cannot help yourself, can you? You have to come here and make a scene." Laura was sitting on the edge of the beige sofa. She was twisting a tissue in her hands, shredding it into tiny white confetti. She looked from me to Marcus, her eyes darting back and forth like a trapped bird. "Mom?" she whispered. "Please, just go home. He is really mad today." I did not look at my daughter. I kept my eyes fixed on the man who had turned my child into a shadow. I walked calmly over to the front door. Marcus watched me, expecting me to leave. Instead, I reached out and audibly slid the deadbolt to the unlock position. The metal click echoed loudly in the silent apartment. Then I turned around and sat down in the armchair facing him. Marcus laughed. It was a loud, incredulous sound. "What was that?" he asked, gesturing with his glass. "Are you leaving the door open for your imaginary army, or are you just senile?" I checked my watch. 7:02. "Sit down, Laura," I said softly. "Evelyn, get out of my house." Marcus snapped, his smile fading. "I am done being polite. If you are not gone in 5 minutes, I am calling security and having you dragged out." I folded my hands in my lap. I did not speak. I focused on the rhythm of my own breathing. In, out. In, out. I needed to be the anchor in the room. The silence began to stretch. It was heavy and suffocating. The air conditioner hummed a low, monotone buzz that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. Marcus took a step toward me, waiting for me to flinch. I remained frozen. I looked at him with the flat, unblinking gaze of someone who has already seen the end of the movie. 7:10. Marcus paced to the window and back. He checked his phone. He looked at me again, and for the first time I saw a crack in his composure. He was used to shouting and getting tears. He was used to threatening and getting submission. He did not know what to do with silence. "Why aren't you saying anything?" he demanded. His voice was rising. "You come in here, you unlock my door, and you sit there like a statue. What is wrong with you?" "I'm waiting," I said. Waiting for what he sneered. God, he isn't coming, Evelyn. Nobody is coming to save you. Laura let out a small sob. "Marcus, please, stop yelling." "Shut up," he spun on her. "This is your mother's fault. She is the one provoking me." 7:15. A sound drifted up from the street below. It was faint at first, muffled by the high-impact glass of the penthouse windows. But it grew louder. It was a wail. A sharp, rising and falling mechanical scream that cuts through the noise of the city. Marcus froze. He turned his head toward the window. The wail was joined by another. Then a third. "What is that?" he muttered. He walked to the window and looked down. His body went rigid. The glass slipped from his fingers and fell onto the thick carpet, bouncing with a dull thud without breaking. Whiskey soaked into the expensive wool, but he did not notice. "Police," he whispered. There are 4 cruisers. They are blocking the entrance." He turned back to face me. The colour had drained from his face, leaving it a pasty grey. His eyes were wide and suddenly very young. The arrogance had evaporated, leaving only the raw panic of a man who realizes he is not the hunter anymore. "What did you do?" he asked. His voice shook. "Evelyn, what did you do?" "I made a phone call," I said, "and I sent a file. A very thick file, Marcus. It contains the sworn affidavit of a woman named Elena Russo from Chicago." "Does that name sound familiar?" He staggered back as if I had slapped him. Laura gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. You can't know that," he stammered. "That was sealed. That was settled." The elevator chimed in the hallway. It was a cheerful, innocent sound. Then came the heavy thud of boots on the marble floor outside. Many boots. Marcus looked at the door I had unlocked. He looked at me. He looked for a way out, but there were only windows and a drop of 40 stories. "You old witch," he hissed, but there was no venom left in it, only fear. The handle of the front door turned. The door did not just open. It was pushed open with the weight of authority. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, flanked by a detective in a cheap suit, whose face I recognized from the precinct picnic 5 years ago. Detective Miller. He held a piece of paper in his hand that looked like Judgment Day. Marcus scrambled backward. He knocked over a vase on the console table, and it shattered, sending ceramic shards skittering across the floor. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus demanded. His voice cracked. "Officers, you can't just barge in here. I know my rights. I want to see a warrant." "We have a warrant, Mr. Hale," Miller said. His voice was bored and professional. "We also have a warrant for your arrest regarding the assault of Laura Hale and the reopening of the case regarding Elena Russo based on new evidence. Elena Marcus went white. That was settled. She signed an NDA. This is illegal." He looked at me. His eyes were bulging. The smooth executive was gone. In his place was a cornered rat baring his teeth. "Laura," he screamed, turning to my daughter. Tell them this is insane. Tell them we are happy." I looked at my daughter. She was trembling so hard her teeth were chattering. She looked at the police. And then she looked at the man who had controlled every breath she took for 3 years. She looked at the bruise on her arm, which was now throbbing under her sweater. Laura. Marcus pleaded, his voice dropping to a manipulative whisper. Baby, don't let them do this to me. I love you. You know I love you. Sometimes I just get passionate. Tell them. Laura stood up. It was a slow movement. She braced her hands on her knees and pushed herself up. She looked small in that big room, but for the first time in months, she was not slouching. She walked over to where I was sitting and stood behind my chair. She placed a hand on my shoulder. Laura started, her voice shaking. He hit me. Last week. And the week before. He threatened to kill me if I told anyone. You lying bitch. Marcus lunged forward. The officers were on him in a second. They slammed him against the wall. The sound of his face hitting the plaster was a dull, sickening thud. I did not flinch. I watched as they wrenched his arms behind his back. I heard the metallic click of handcuffs. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Get off me. Marcus was screaming now. Do you know who I am? I will have your badges. I will sue the department. I make more in a month than you idiots make in a... You have the right to remain silent. Miller recited over him, tightening the cuffs. I suggest you use it. They hauled him up. His hair was messed up. His nose was bleeding. He looked pathetic. As they dragged him toward the door, he twisted his head back to look at me. I was still sitting in the armchair. I had not moved a muscle. I looked him dead in the eye. You! Marcus spat blood on his chin. You did this. You ruined my life. You are nothing. You are a dried-up old hag. I stood up then. I walked over to him until I was standing toe-to-toe with him. He was restrained, and I was free. I am a mother, I said softly. And you made the mistake of thinking that meant I was weak. You thought because I was old, I was invisible. But you forgot one thing, Marcus. The person who files the paperwork knows where all the bodies are buried. His eyes widened. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He saw it then. He saw the calculation. He saw the patience. He saw that while he was busy admiring his own reflection, I had been dismantling his life brick by brick. The officers shoved him forward. He stumbled out into the hallway, crying and cursing, his voice echoing down the corridor until the elevator doors slid shut, cutting him off. The apartment fell silent. The air felt lighter. It was as if a heavy toxic gas had been sucked out of the room. I turned to Laura. She was crying, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief. I opened my arms, and she fell into them, sobbing into my shoulder. I held her tight, smoothing her hair, while the sirens wailed outside, taking the monster away to a cage where he belonged. He had underestimated me. He had looked at a grey-haired woman and seen a victim. He never stopped to think that grey hair is just a scar from surviving a long time in a hard world. And that was his final mistake. The days following Marcus's arrest were a blur of legal motions and public disgrace. The company he worked for wasted no time. They issued a statement distancing themselves from him within 24 hours of the story breaking. It turns out that corporate loyalty is even more fragile than a marriage built on lies. The local news picked it up briefly, but the real trial happened in the court of public opinion. The man who had carefully curated his image as a benevolent, successful professional was exposed as a petty tyrant who beat women behind closed doors. Laura moved back into her old room in my row house. It was not a triumphant return. She did not dance on his grave. She spent the first week sleeping and the second week crying. It is a hard thing to mourn a man who is still alive, especially when you realize the man you loved never actually existed. He was just a performance, a costume Marcus wore to get what he wanted. I sat with her on the porch one evening, watching the autumn leaves drift across the sidewalk. She was holding a mug of tea, looking stronger than she had in years, but there was a sadness in her eyes that I knew would never fully go away. "I feel stupid, Mom," she said quietly. I let him do that to me. I let him convince me I was crazy. "You were not stupid, Laura," I replied. "You were hopeful, and he used that hope against you. That is not your shame to carry. It is his—" "He called the lawyer today," she said, looking down at her hands. "He wants to settle. He wants to know if I will ask the DEA for leniency." "And what did you say I asked?" She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw the steel that had been forged in the fire of this trauma. "I told him to go to hell," she said. I smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. There was no parade for what I did. I did not feel like a hero. I felt like a mother who had been forced to dirty her hands to pull her child out of a burning building. I had used blackmail and intimidation. I had leveraged old favors and bent the law. I had become something hard and unforgiving. But as I looked at my daughter safe and breathing the free air, I knew I would do it all again. I would burn the whole world down to keep her warm. Marcus sits in a cell now awaiting trial. His high-priced lawyers are trying to cut a deal, but the evidence is too overwhelming. The affidavit from Elena, combined with the photos of Laura's injuries, painted a picture the jury would not ignore. He has lost his job, his reputation, and his freedom. He sits alone in a concrete box, and I imagine he has a lot of time to think about the irrelevant old woman he mocked in his living room. He thought he could crush us because he saw kindness and mistook it for weakness. He thought he could silence us because he saw patience and mistook it for submission. He forgot that the most dangerous creature on earth is not a man with a gun or a corporation with a team of lawyers. It is a mother who sees her child in pain. We live in a world that tells women to be quiet, to be nice, to smooth things over. But I learned something in my 57 years. Silence does not save you. It only buys you a little more time before the blow lands. I chose to speak. I chose to fight. And the price of that choice was my innocence. But the reward was my daughter's life. So if you ever see a bruise that does not look right, or hear a story that does not add up, do not look away. Do not assume it is none of your business. Because sometimes the only thing standing between a monster and his victim is an old woman with a notebook and the will to use it. Thanks so much for listening to my story, guys. I'd love to know where y'all are tuning in from. So drop a comment down below and let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Nora Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so we can get this video out to more people who need to hear it.